The galaxy laughed because they thought the war was over. The words were carved into a forgotten metal plaque hidden deep inside a maintenance corridor that almost nobody used anymore. Thousands of people walked past it every year. Almost none of them ever stopped to read it. On Outpost Helios Prime, that seemed fitting. The station itself was one of the busiest military installations in known space. More than 60,000 personnel lived and worked within its massive steel framework. Starships arrived every hour. Cargo moved through endless docking bays. Officers hurried between command centers carrying reports, projections, and strategic updates. Every corridor echoed with activity. Every room served a purpose. Every person seemed important. Except one. Ethan Walker pushed a cleaning cart through Command Sector 7 while hundreds of officers moved around him. Most never looked in his direction. Some stepped around him without noticing. Others barely remembered seeing him at all. Ethan never appeared bothered by it. He simply continued his work. A maintenance cloth rested over one shoulder. Cleaning equipment rattled softly inside his cart. His gray station uniform carried no rank insignia, no decorations, no symbols of distinction. To most people, he was just another janitor keeping the station clean. Near the center of the command complex, giant observation windows revealed the stars beyond. Hundreds of points of light stretched across the darkness. Starships drifted through traffic lanes like glowing rivers crossing an endless ocean. Ethan paused briefly beside the glass. His reflection stared back at him. White hair touched the edges of his temples. Lines marked the corners of his eyes. The face looking back seemed ordinary. Tired, perhaps. Experienced, but ordinary. A young lieutenant nearly collided with his cleaning cart while rushing through the corridor. "Sorry," the officer said without slowing down. Ethan smiled. "You are fine." Seconds later, the lieutenant disappeared into the crowd. The interaction lasted less than 3 seconds. By the end of the day, the young officer would not remember it happened. That was how life worked on Helios Prime. The spotlight belonged elsewhere. High above the station, inside the primary command tower, General Lyra Kales stood before a fleet projection nearly 20 feet wide. Holographic stars floated around her like a living map of the galaxy. Her royal blue skin reflected the pale glow of tactical displays. Silver-white hair rested neatly across the collar of her dark uniform. Every officer in the room watched her. Every decision carried weight. Every word shaped military operations affecting entire sectors. Lyra had earned her position through discipline, intelligence, and relentless determination. Few questioned her judgment. Fewer still challenged it. Today, however, she seemed irritated. Strategic simulations had produced inconsistent outcomes throughout the week. Nothing serious. Nothing dangerous. Yet enough to create frustration. Several senior officers gathered around the command table reviewing projections. One display flickered unexpectedly. A data feed disappeared. Another officer rushed to correct the issue. "Maintenance again?" Lyra asked. "Probably a systems relay problem," an aide replied. "Someone from station services already submitted a request." Lyra sighed. "Then let us hope they arrive eventually." A few officers laughed quietly. Nobody thought much about the comment. Nobody considered who actually handled those requests. Down in Command Sector 7, Ethan Walker continued polishing a railing beneath artificial lights. The metal reflected stars from the observation windows. Around him, officers discussed strategy, politics, and military affairs. None of them noticed the quiet human standing nearby. None of them knew that long before Helios Prime existed, entire civilizations had once whispered a title now almost forgotten by history. Reaper. And none of them imagined that the last person ever to carry that title was currently holding a cleaning cloth in his hand. The next morning began like every other morning on Helios Prime. Artificial sunlight brightened the station's central corridors. Cargo crews started their shifts. Officers filled transit elevators carrying tablets and reports. The constant hum of machinery blended into the background like distant rain. Life moved forward with predictable precision. Ethan Walker pushed his cleaning cart through the upper command sector shortly after 7 o'clock. Fresh maintenance requests had arrived overnight. A railing needed polishing. Several observation windows required cleaning. One conference room floor needed attention after a late-night strategy session. None of the assignments bothered him. He approached them with the same quiet patience he brought to everything else. Inside the command tower, General Lyra Kales was already conducting a senior briefing. Dozens of officers gathered around a massive holographic display showing fleet movements across nearby sectors. The atmosphere felt tense. Supply routes were experiencing unusual disruptions. Communications delays continued appearing without explanation. Nothing critical had failed, but small problems seemed to be multiplying. Lyra disliked inefficiency. "I want updated projections by noon," she said firmly. "And I want actual answers, not theories." Several officers nodded immediately. The meeting continued for nearly an hour before a maintenance alert appeared unexpectedly across one of the display panels. A technician frowned. That should not be there. He attempted to remove the notification. Instead, 3 additional alerts appeared beside it. The room remained silent for a moment. Then someone laughed. "Station maintenance again." Another officer smiled. "Maybe the janitors are planning a strategic offensive." Several people chuckled. Even Lyra allowed herself a faint smile before returning her attention to the briefing. The comment seemed harmless. Just another joke among officers. Minutes later, the meeting concluded. Personnel began leaving the chamber. Outside, Ethan was cleaning a corridor adjacent to the command center when 2 younger officers approached. One carried a stack of data tablets. The other looked barely old enough to have graduated from the academy. As they rounded the corner, one accidentally bumped Ethan's cleaning cart. A container tipped sideways. Several maintenance tools spilled onto the floor with a loud metallic clatter. The sound echoed through the corridor. Officers nearby turned to look. Ethan immediately knelt to collect the scattered equipment. Before he could finish, the younger officer laughed nervously. "Looks like the station's greatest tactical disaster happened right here." A few nearby personnel smiled. Another officer added, "Careful. We cannot afford to lose our best janitor." More laughter followed. Not cruel laughter. Not malicious. Just the casual amusement of people who never imagined the man before them might be anything more than what they saw. Ethan simply picked up the tools and placed them back inside the cart. "Thank you for the warning," he said calmly. The officers laughed again and continued down the corridor. From the nearby doorway, General Lyra happened to witness the exchange. She watched for a moment before shaking her head. "At least someone keeps the station running," she remarked lightly. Several officers smiled at the comment. Ethan heard it. He looked briefly toward the commander's group. Then he returned to his work without saying a word. Minutes later, the corridor became quiet again. The crowd dispersed. Footsteps faded into the distance. Ethan resumed cleaning beneath the glow of overhead lights. His expression never changed. No anger. No embarrassment. No resentment. Just calm focus. Yet far above the station, beyond layers of steel and glass, a faint signal moved silently through deep space. Ancient, unrecognized, forgotten by almost everyone still alive. It drifted toward Helios Prime, carrying a pattern that had not appeared in official records for more than 70 years. And somewhere deep within Ethan Walker's memory, a part of him would soon recognize it immediately. While the officers of Helios Prime continued laughing about janitors and maintenance requests, history itself was quietly moving closer. The signal arrived during the station's artificial night cycle. Most of Helios Prime never noticed. Cargo routes continued operating. Patrol ships maintained schedules. Officers reviewed reports beneath glowing displays. Life moved forward exactly as it had the day before. The anomaly first appeared inside a long-range monitoring network buried deep within the station's communications grid. At first glance, it looked insignificant. A faint transmission. Weak. Fragmented. Ancient. Automated systems attempted classification and failed. The signal matched no active government. No known military frequency. No registered civilian network. Analysts marked it for further review and moved on. By morning, the anomaly had quietly reached 3 additional monitoring stations. Then 5. Then 12. Nobody understood why. Inside Command Tower 1, General Lyra Kales reviewed overnight updates while sipping a cup of steaming herbal tea. Several officers presented routine briefings. Fleet readiness remained stable. Resource levels remained acceptable. The strange signal received only a few seconds of attention. Unidentified transmission, an analyst explained. Probably residual interference from old navigation satellites. Lyra glanced at the report. Keep monitoring it. Yes, General. The meeting continued. Nobody considered the matter urgent. Several levels below, Ethan Walker pushed his cleaning cart through a quiet maintenance corridor near Communications Sector 3. A technician had requested floor maintenance after replacing a damaged power conduit. The corridor was empty except for the distant hum of machinery. Ethan worked slowly, methodically. The familiar rhythm soothed him. Then a nearby wall display flickered. A diagnostic screen activated unexpectedly. Lines of encrypted data appeared for less than a second before disappearing. Ethan froze. The cleaning cloth stopped moving in his hand. For the first time in days, perhaps weeks, something changed in his expression. The display flashed again. A symbol appeared briefly among the data stream. 3 interlocking circles surrounding a vertical line. Old. Very old. Ethan stared at it. The color drained slightly from his face. No, he whispered. The screen returned to normal. Silence filled the corridor. Several seconds passed. Ethan remained motionless. The symbol should not exist. Not here. Not now. Not after so many years. Slowly, he stepped closer to the display and accessed the system logs. The station's security permissions should have prevented access. Somehow they did not. The data appeared instantly. Ethan studied the transmission history. His eyes moved across hundreds of lines. Coordinates. Timing markers. Encryption fragments. Every detail deepened his concern. A maintenance worker entering the corridor noticed him standing there. Everything okay? Ethan looked up immediately. His calm expression returned. Yes. The worker nodded and continued walking. Ethan waited until he disappeared around the corner. Then he looked back at the screen. The signal pattern matched records that should have remained buried forever. Records older than most governments currently existing in the galaxy. Records connected to a chapter of human history almost nobody remembered. His reflection stared back from the display glass. Older now. Slower perhaps. But not forgetful. He remembered exactly what the symbol meant. And that frightened him more than he wanted to admit. Several hours later, inside the command tower, analysts continued discussing the mysterious transmission. The signal had grown stronger. Additional fragments were appearing. New stations were detecting it every hour. General Lyra listened carefully as uncertainty spread through the room. Nobody possessed answers. Nobody recognized the source. Yet somewhere else on the station, a janitor already knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever was approaching Helios Prime was not new. It was a ghost from humanity's past. And ghosts only returned when something unfinished was waiting for them. The signal spread through Helios Prime like a question nobody could answer. Every 6 hours it appeared stronger. Every analysis produced more uncertainty. Communications specialists compared it against thousands of historical records. Artificial intelligence systems searched centuries of archived data. Nothing matched. The transmission seemed to exist outside every known classification. By the 4th day, concern had replaced curiosity. Inside the command tower, General Lyra Kales studied a wall of reports while pale blue light from the holographic displays reflected across her uniform. Sleep had become rare. New anomalies appeared every shift. Long-range sensors occasionally lost synchronization. Navigation arrays reported timing discrepancies lasting fractions of a second. Automated systems corrected the problems immediately, yet nobody understood why they were happening. Status update, Lyra said. A senior analyst activated another display. The signal continues approaching the station. Source. Unknown. Intent. Unknown. Lyra folded her arms. The answer no longer surprised her. Every briefing sounded exactly the same. Unknown source. Unknown purpose. Unknown destination. The uncertainty was beginning to affect morale. Several officers exchanged worried glances. Nobody liked mysteries traveling through deep space toward a military installation. Several levels below the command center, Ethan Walker stood alone in a maintenance storage room. A portable display illuminated the darkness. Ancient symbols filled the screen. Most people would have seen random data. Ethan saw history. His eyes moved slowly across the information. The transmission pattern continued evolving exactly as he feared. Layer by layer. Sequence by sequence. Memories surfaced like old ghosts emerging from fog. Places long gone. Faces long lost. Decisions made decades earlier. He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, the display still showed the same impossible truth. The signal belonged to a network humanity had abandoned generations ago. A network that should not still be operating. Somewhere in deep space, something had awakened. Hours later, Helios Prime experienced its first major disruption. It began without warning. Across the station, thousands of screens flickered simultaneously. Lights dimmed. Communication channels filled with static. Elevators paused between levels. Cargo systems stopped responding for nearly 20 seconds. Then everything returned to normal. The interruption was brief. Yet the effect on command personnel was immediate. Emergency teams rushed to diagnostics. Engineers launched investigations. Dozens of departments searched for explanations. None appeared. Inside the command tower, frustration spread rapidly. "Report," Lyra demanded. Technicians worked feverishly across their consoles. "Power systems are stable. Communications are stable. Navigation systems are stable." Every answer sounded identical. Stable. Functional. Normal. Yet something had clearly happened. The evidence surrounded them. Several officers began debating theories. Software failure. External interference. Sensor malfunction. No explanation fit the data. Near the rear of the command center, Ethan quietly cleaned a polished section of flooring while technicians argued nearby. Nobody paid attention to him. Nobody noticed that he occasionally glanced toward the tactical displays. Nobody noticed that he already recognized the pattern. The disruption had not been an attack. It had been a handshake, a system announcing its presence. Testing responses. Confirming connections. Ethan lowered his gaze toward the floor. His reflection stared back at him from the polished surface. For the first time since arriving on Helios Prime, genuine concern settled across his face. Not fear. Something heavier. Recognition. He knew what came after a handshake. He had seen it before. Decades ago. During a chapter of human history most civilizations barely remembered. Across the command center, General Lyra continued searching for answers. Across the station, thousands of personnel continued their routines. Life appeared normal on the surface. Yet beneath the steel corridors and glowing displays, an invisible clock had begun counting down. And the only person who understood what it meant was the janitor everyone kept overlooking. The next disruption lasted 42 seconds. Long enough for everyone on Helios Prime to notice. Short enough that nobody could fully explain it afterward. It began during the station's busiest operational cycle. Cargo traffic filled the docking lanes. Hundreds of vessels exchanged data with orbital control. Military personnel moved between command sectors carrying updated reports about the mysterious signal. Then every display on the station briefly went dark. Not completely, just enough. Enough for holographic projections to flicker. Enough for navigation markers to disappear. Enough for thousands of people to stop what they were doing and look around. When the systems returned, a strange silence followed. It felt as if the station itself had taken a breath. Inside the command tower, General Lyra Kales immediately ordered a full diagnostic review. Technicians flooded every network. Engineers inspected every subsystem. Analysts compared millions of lines of data. Once again, nothing appeared damaged. Nothing appeared compromised. Yet everyone knew something was changing. The unexplained signal continued growing stronger. "I want every possible theory," Lyra said. "No matter how unlikely." Officers nodded and scattered across the command floor. For the first time, uncertainty was becoming visible. The confidence that usually defined Helios Prime had begun to crack. Several levels below, Ethan Walker stood alone beside a maintenance access panel overlooking one of the station's internal transport hubs. The crowd moved around him without noticing. Travelers checked schedules. Officers reviewed reports. Cargo workers pushed equipment through the corridor. Life continued normally. Yet Ethan's attention remained fixed on a small data screen hidden inside the maintenance panel. The pattern was accelerating, faster than before. He studied the transmission sequence carefully. Every new fragment confirmed what he already suspected. The countdown had entered its next stage. Ethan closed the panel slowly. His reflection appeared briefly in the polished metal surface. Older eyes looked back at him. Tired eyes. Eyes that had seen this pattern long ago. For several moments he remained still. Then he made a decision. An hour later, Ethan entered Command Tower 1 for the first time in months. The security officers barely looked at him. Maintenance personnel moved through the tower every day. Nobody found it unusual. Ethan crossed the command floor, carrying a maintenance tablet beneath one arm. Officers rushed past without recognizing him. At the center of the room, General Lyra stood reviewing another tactical projection. Ethan stopped several feet away. "General." Lyra looked up. Recognition crossed her face immediately. "Maintenance." No, the answer surprised her. Ethan rarely spoke directly to command staff. "What is it?" For a moment, the surrounding noise seemed to fade. Officers continued working. Displays continued glowing. Yet Ethan's expression carried a seriousness she had never seen before. "The signal is not random." Lyra studied him carefully. "You know something about it?" Ethan hesitated, not because he lacked answers, because he understood how unlikely they would sound. "You need to begin evacuation contingency planning." Several nearby officers overheard the statement and turned toward him. One analyst frowned. "Based on what?" Ethan met Lyra's eyes. "Based on experience." Silence followed. Then one officer shook his head. Another looked confused. A third exchanged an amused glance with a colleague. The reaction was predictable. A janitor offering strategic warnings inside a military command center sounded absurd. Lyra remained professional. "Do you have evidence?" Ethan looked toward the tactical display where fragments of the mysterious signal continued scrolling across the screen. "Not the kind you want." The answer changed nothing. Protocol demanded proof. Data. Verification. Not intuition. Not memory. Not experience from events nobody else remembered. After several seconds, Lyra nodded politely. "Thank you for the concern." Ethan understood immediately. She did not believe him. Not completely. Perhaps not at all. He offered a small nod and stepped away. The officers returned to their work. Conversations resumed. The moment passed quickly. Yet as Ethan walked back toward the maintenance elevators, an uncomfortable feeling settled over him. Not frustration. Not disappointment. Something closer to inevitability. Because the signal was no longer approaching. It had arrived. And somewhere beyond the edge of known space, something ancient had finally noticed that Helios Prime was listening. The station received the message at 2:17 in the morning. No alarm announced its arrival. No warning lights flashed across command displays. The transmission simply appeared inside the deepest layer of Helios Prime's communications network, as though it had always been there waiting to be discovered. A technician performing routine diagnostics found it first. The message consisted of only 8 words. No signature. No origin marker. No encryption. Just 8 simple words displayed across his screen. The technician stared at them for several seconds before forwarding the transmission to command staff. Within minutes, the message reached General Lyra Kales. She read it twice, then a third time. The words made no sense. Yet they carried a strange weight she could not explain. "Is this some kind of joke?" she asked. "We do not think so," an analyst replied. The transmission floated above the command table. Silent. Motionless. Waiting. The message read, "Reaper protocol detected. Final witness confirmed. Welcome home." Nobody in the room recognized the phrase. Several officers searched military databases immediately. Others scanned historical archives. The result was always the same. No records. No references. No explanations. The words should have meant nothing. Yet everyone felt that they meant something. Somewhere else aboard the station, Ethan Walker nearly dropped the cup of coffee he was holding when he saw the message. A maintenance worker had left a news display active inside a break room. The transmission appeared briefly during a command update broadcast. Ethan froze. The room suddenly felt smaller. Colder. His eyes locked onto the screen. Reaper protocol detected. Final witness confirmed. Welcome home. For several seconds, he simply stared. The coffee remained untouched in his hand. The maintenance workers around him continued casual conversation, completely unaware that the color had drained from Ethan's face. One of them glanced toward him. "Everything okay?" Ethan nodded automatically. "Yes." The answer came too quickly, too quietly. He set the coffee down and left the room before anyone could ask another question. Deep inside the station's archive division, a separate investigation had already begun. The strange message triggered automated searches across thousands of historical databases. Most returned nothing. Then one search found a match. A partial match. Buried beneath layers of restricted military records older than Helios Prime itself. A young historical analyst noticed the result immediately. Hold on. The archive system expanded another file. Then another. Security warnings appeared. Clearance restrictions followed. The analyst called a supervisor. Within an hour, an entire team had gathered around the terminal. None of them expected what they found. Ancient Terran military records surfaced from forgotten storage networks. Most were heavily restricted. Some had not been accessed in decades. Yet one phrase appeared repeatedly throughout the files. Reaper Protocol. The room became silent. More documents opened. More records emerged. Historical references. Operational directives. Emergency contingency plans. The deeper they searched, the stranger the discovery became. Every trail eventually led toward a single designation. Final witness. The exact phrase contained within the mysterious message. One analyst looked up slowly. Who was the final witness? Nobody answered immediately. Then another file opened. A personnel record began loading. Security permissions fought the request. Archive systems hesitated. Layers of authorization slowly unfolded. Finally, a photograph appeared. The room froze. The image showed a younger human wearing a dark Terran uniform from another era. His expression looked calm. Familiar. One analyst blinked repeatedly. Another leaned closer to the screen. That cannot be right. Yet it was. The name beneath the image left no room for doubt. Ethan Walker. While the archive team stared in disbelief, Ethan himself stood alone inside a quiet observation corridor overlooking the stars. Beyond the glass stretched an endless sea of darkness and distant light. He already knew what the message meant. He knew why it had arrived. More importantly, he knew what came next. After 70 years of silence, something from humanity's oldest secrets had finally found him again. And for the first time since arriving on Helios Prime, Ethan Walker looked less like a janitor and more like a man carrying the weight of an entire forgotten age. The discovery spread through Helios Prime faster than any official announcement could contain. Archive personnel tried restricting access. Security teams attempted classification reviews. Command staff ordered discretion. None of it mattered. Rumors moved through a station of 60,000 people like electricity through a wire. By the next day, officers across multiple departments were asking the same question. Why did an ancient military protocol identify a janitor as the final witness? Inside the archive division, historians worked around the clock. Every hour uncovered another piece of a forgotten story. The records were incomplete. Some files had degraded with age. Others remained locked behind security permissions no longer recognized by modern systems. Yet a pattern was emerging. Reapers had never been executioners. They had never been conquerors. The title meant something entirely different. During humanity's most dangerous era, Reapers served as guardians of continuity. They carried knowledge, history, evacuation networks, survival protocols, and the locations of hidden sanctuaries designed to preserve civilization if everything else failed. Their duty was simple. If humanity ever stood on the edge of extinction, the Reapers ensured something survived. A culture, a memory, a future. One historian sat staring at the records long after his shift ended. "We misunderstood the name," he whispered. Another researcher nodded slowly. Completely. The deeper they searched, the clearer the truth became. Reapers were not symbols of death. They were symbols of endurance. The title represented responsibility carried beyond reason. Sacrifice without recognition. Service without reward. And according to every surviving record, only one remained alive. Ethan Walker. Inside the command tower, General Lyra Kales reviewed the findings personally. File after file appeared before her. Historical summaries. Operational records. Preservation directives. Many contained references to people who no longer existed and places erased by time. Yet one detail appeared repeatedly. Witness status. Final witness. Lyra finally asked the question nobody had answered. What exactly is a final witness? The lead historian hesitated. Then he opened another document. The room fell silent as the text appeared. A final witness was the last living individual capable of verifying the truth of an entire historical era. Not because they studied it, because they lived it. Lyra leaned back slowly. The implications settled over the room like gravity. Ethan was not simply connected to history. He was history. Somewhere else on the station, Ethan sat alone in a quiet observation lounge overlooking the stars. The room was empty except for him. Soft light reflected across the glass. Far beyond the station, distant suns shimmered against the darkness. He held an old metal object in his hand. Small, worn, nearly forgotten. A symbol rested on its surface. 3 interlocking circles surrounding a vertical line. The same symbol that had appeared inside the mysterious signal. His thumb brushed across the metal gently. Memory lingered there. Voices long gone. Promises made decades earlier. The stars outside remained silent. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. An incoming station message. Priority level 1. Ethan already knew who had sent it. He opened the communication. General Lyra's image appeared. Her expression looked very different from the woman who once laughed with officers making jokes about janitors. There was no amusement now, only seriousness, respect, and perhaps a trace of humility. "Mr. Walker," she said carefully, "I believe we need to talk." Ethan studied the image for several seconds. Then he looked back toward the stars. The signal had found him. The archives had found him. The past had found him. Eventually, he knew this moment would come. "Yes," he answered quietly. "I think we do." Outside Helios Prime, the mysterious transmission continued moving through space. Not threatening, not hostile, simply waiting, as though it had spent 70 years searching for one specific person. And now that it had finally found him, the galaxy was beginning to understand why an entire forgotten age had trusted Ethan Walker to be its last witness. General Lyra Kales chose not to summon Ethan to the command tower. Instead, she went to him. The decision surprised nearly everyone around her. Senior officers offered conference rooms, private briefing chambers, secure command facilities. Lyra declined all of them. "If I want answers," she said quietly, "I should be willing to walk the distance myself." An hour later, she arrived at the observation lounge where Ethan often spent his breaks. The room overlooked a sea of stars stretching beyond the station's transparent hull. Artificial lights remained dim. Silence filled most of the space. Ethan sat near the glass, holding a small metal object in his hands. He looked up as Lyra entered. Neither spoke immediately. The stars seemed to do enough talking for both of them. Lyra approached slowly and sat across from him. For the first time since meeting him, she was not looking at a maintenance worker. She was looking at someone whose life spanned chapters of history she barely understood. "I owe you an apology," she said. Ethan smiled faintly. "For what?" The question caught her off guard. "You know for what." Ethan looked toward the stars again. People usually see what they expect to see. Lyra lowered her eyes briefly. The memory of careless jokes and dismissive assumptions felt heavier now. "That does not make it right." Ethan nodded once. "No, it does not." Several seconds passed. Then Lyra finally asked the question that had occupied her thoughts for days. "What is a Reaper?" The room became very quiet. Ethan studied the metal object resting in his hands. The symbol reflected pale starlight across its worn surface. "Most people think the title meant fear," he said. "They are wrong." Lyra listened carefully. Ethan continued. "When humanity faced collapse generations ago, entire worlds disappeared. Governments failed. Colonies vanished. Records were lost." His voice remained calm, measured. "The Reapers were created to preserve what could not be replaced." "Knowledge?" Lyra asked. "Knowledge, culture, history, people." Ethan's eyes remained fixed on the stars. "We were not trained to destroy. We were trained to remember." The answer settled over the room like a revelation. Every rumor, every assumption, every myth surrounding the title suddenly felt meaningless. Lyra thought about the archives, the preservation protocols, the final witness designation. Everything fit together now. "And you are the last one." Ethan smiled sadly. Apparently. For a moment neither spoke. Outside the station, distant suns burned across the darkness. Civilizations rose and fell beneath those lights. Entire histories unfolded. Yet somehow one quiet human had carried the memory of an age everyone else forgot. Lyra finally looked at the object in his hands. "What is that?" Ethan turned it over carefully. "My witness token." The metal appeared old beyond measurement. Small scratches covered the surface. Time had worn away much of its detail. Yet the symbol remained visible. 3 circles surrounding a single line. "Every Reaper carried one," Ethan said. "When the last Reaper remained, the token became proof that the memory survived." Lyra stared at it silently. Then another thought occurred to her. "The signal." Ethan nodded. "It belongs to an automated preservation network." "The one searching for you?" "Yes." Lyra leaned back slowly. "Why now?" Ethan's expression grew thoughtful. Because the network believes its mission is ending. Those words lingered in the air. Ending. The implication felt enormous. For 70 years the system had searched, waited, watched, and now it believed it had finally found the person it was meant to reach. Somewhere deep within Helios Prime, the mysterious transmission continued spreading through forgotten communication pathways. Not threatening, not hostile, patient, as though it were waiting for a conversation that had been delayed for decades. Lyra looked at Ethan differently now, not with admiration for a legend, not with awe for a historical figure, with respect for a man who had carried an impossible burden quietly and without complaint. Outside the observation window, countless stars shimmered across the darkness. And for the first time since the signal arrived, both of them understood that the answers they were searching for were finally within reach. The final answer arrived without fanfare. No alarms sounded. No emergency broadcasts interrupted the station. The mysterious signal simply completed its journey. At exactly 6:03 in the morning, every display connected to Helios Prime briefly illuminated with the same symbol. 3 circles surrounding a single line. Then the symbol vanished. In its place appeared a single archive request. Access authorization, final witness. For several seconds, nobody moved. Command personnel stared at their screens. Historians watched from archive terminals. Engineers paused their diagnostics. Across the entire station, thousands of people witnessed the same message. Then the system waited. General Lyra Cayley stood inside the command tower beside Ethan Walker. This time nobody questioned his presence. Nobody looked at the maintenance uniform. Nobody saw a janitor. They saw the one person the signal had crossed decades to find. Ethan stepped forward quietly. The central display projected the request before him. Soft light reflected across his face. Around the room, silence settled like snowfall. Ethan reached into his pocket and removed the worn witness token. The old metal symbol glimmered beneath the holographic light. As he placed it against the display interface, something remarkable happened. Not an explosion of secrets. Not a revelation of forgotten weapons. Something far simpler. Thousands of archived records began appearing across the network. Lost histories, preserved languages, cultural records, scientific discoveries, personal journals, messages from families long gone, entire chapters of human civilization that had been safeguarded in silence for generations. The preservation network had not been protecting a weapon. It had been protecting memory. Tears appeared in the eyes of one historian watching from the archive division. Another simply sat down and stared. Civilization after civilization had spent centuries searching for lost knowledge. Yet humanity's oldest guardians had hidden it in the safest place imaginable. Time. Ethan watched the records appear one after another. Some names he recognized. Some voices he remembered. Friends. Teachers. People who had trusted him decades ago when the future seemed uncertain. The burden he carried all these years suddenly felt lighter. The network had completed its mission. The memories were no longer his responsibility alone. General Lyra stood beside him, speechless. "This is what you protected?" she asked quietly. Ethan nodded. Someone had to remember. The answer lingered in the room. Someone had to remember. Not glory. Not victories. Not power. People. Their stories. Their lives. Their hopes. The things that made civilizations worth saving in the first place. Hours later, official announcements spread throughout Helios Prime. The station celebrated one of the greatest historical recoveries in modern history. Scholars rejoiced. Researchers worked tirelessly. Entire departments dedicated themselves to preserving and studying the archives. Ethan Walker attended none of the ceremonies. He accepted no awards, gave no speeches, requested no recognition. The following morning, a young lieutenant entered Command Sector 7 and stopped in surprise. Near the observation windows, a familiar figure pushed a cleaning cart beneath the artificial sunlight. Ethan worked quietly, exactly as he always had. The polished floor reflected stars from beyond the glass. Nearby officers passed through the corridor. This time many paused. Some nodded respectfully. Others simply smiled. Ethan returned each gesture with the same calm expression. General Lyra eventually appeared at the far end of the corridor. She watched him for several moments before approaching. "You could be anywhere right now," she said. Ethan glanced around the station. "I am." Lyra laughed softly. For the first time, the sound carried no arrogance. only understanding. Together they looked through the observation windows toward the stars. The signal was gone. The mission was complete. The past had finally reached the future. And in a galaxy that often measured greatness through power, rank, or fame, Helios Prime learned a different lesson. Sometimes the most important person in the room is the one nobody notices. Sometimes the guardian of an entire civilization carries a mop instead of a crown. And sometimes the strongest thing a human can do is simply remember.